All right, guys, check it out. So we're gonna go to the whiteboard and I'm gonna show you how I program for each one of my athletes. Let's get into it. All right, guys, so before we go over how I would program, let's go over programming itself. Here we go. The objective for when you are putting together the program is to develop a sound systematic approach to help improve X, whether that be for your sport, whether that be just health and wellness, whatever it is, that's what we want to work on and accomplish with the actual programming. So when you look at a program and a model, it's a system, it's a strategy that is going to allow you to get the goal accomplished. When we're putting together our program, we want to look at objectives and the goal and small goals and the overarching goal, whether that be sports specific for our athletes, whether that be overall health for just general population, or body composition if you want to bring down your weight and look a certain way. That's going to be something that we want to make sure that that is one of the objectives that we want to cover and accomplish throughout the process. Okay, so now that we understand the objectives and goals, let's go over the factors to consider as you're putting together your program. So again, we want to look at the goals that you want to accomplish. You want to look at the overarching goal, and we also want to hit small goals throughout each week so that we can maintain progress. Time frame, how long do we have to achieve our maximal goal, right? Whether that be 8 weeks, 16 weeks, whatever have you, that has to come into play when you're putting together your plan. The schedule, how many days a week, your split, your routine. Do you want to do a push-pull routine? Do you want to do a full body routine? That's going to be important when you're putting together the plan as well. You want to look at your strengths and you want to look at your weaknesses. What are the limiting factors to getting the overarching goal accomplished? You know, if you are looking to improve your speed and your overall performance, maybe it's something that we have to work on from a weakness standpoint to improve your quickness, improve on your acceleration, improve on your turnover. Whatever have you, there is going to be a focus point and something that we want to make sure that we're putting in and integrating so that we can decrease those limiters. Asymmetries and deficiencies, right? So we also want to look at, from an exercise selection standpoint, what are the joint prerequisites that you have? Also, we want to look at injury history. What are some of the things that may have injured you in the past, and what are the injuries that you have that hinder your overall movement capacity? And then I'm also looking at personality, right? So personality is going to dictate how we actually attack each workout and the program itself. That's going to also dictate the exercise selection. And I'll go into that in a minute. But adherence to the program is important. If you're not confident and you're not excited about going into the weight room and getting the job done, or going into, the training field, you're not going to keep up with the program. It's gonna fall to the wayside and you're not gonna see the progress necessary. Again, we wanna make sure that the program matches our personality type. Okay, so now let's look at the foundational patterns. And when you're looking at that from an exercise selection standpoint, this is what I prioritize first. Primarily what you're gonna be looking at is some sort of squat pattern, so a knee bend, a hinge pattern, which is bending of the waist or a deadlift variation, a push or press variation, a pull or row variation, rotation through the transverse plane, and then a lunge variation for unilateral work. That can be done in a frontal plane, that can be done in a sagittal plane. But the goal, like I said, is to prioritize these exercises that are correlated or that are conducive to your joint prerequisites. So we want to look at injury history, we want to look at your movement quality, and that will dictate and prioritize what we need to do from a foundational patterns perspective. When I look at a workout, I'm gonna go ahead and put the compound movements first, because that's gonna be the most intensity that we're going to try to produce with a large amount of muscle. So from a compound movement perspective, that can be a front squat, that can be a power clean, anything that's gonna use a large amount of muscle in one particular movement. And that's gonna be what we call tester lifts. So those exercises, or those lifts per se, are going to be something that we use as an assessment tool to see if we got better. Now, the next thing that we're gonna look at is regional movements. So if we're looking at it from, let's say we're working the legs or we're working a squat pattern, my compound movement is gonna be a back squat, and then my regional movement will be a leg press, right? So I'm gonna improve on the strengthening of my legs in a particular way that will help with the compound movement. So that's what we call builder lifts, right? So they're gonna be special exercises that will enhance the tester lift. Now after that, you're gonna be doing smaller muscle groups. So we're gonna be working in isolated fashion for your accessory exercises. Usually that's gonna be 3 to 4 exercises per muscle group that will enhance everything up this line here. So from the regional movements to the compound movements, we wanna make sure that we're looking at and feeling out what is the weak link in that movement pattern. If it's hamstrings, then we'll attack hamstrings. If it's quadriceps, then we're gonna attack the quads. Whatever it is, that's what we wanna work on in a higher volume. So that's where you're gonna be working more hypertrophy ranges in your isolated movements. Now, let's move on over to the pyramid of performance, right? When you're looking at a pyramid, the base is what we really want to focus on first. So I got this one from Dr. Marek Health. If you look at it, down the line, we got adherence being the most important and the first thing that you have to look at, right? So it doesn't matter what you put together. If they're not going to adhere to the program and they're not gonna stick with it or buy into it, then you're not gonna get the progress that you've been looking for. It has to be interesting and it has to be relevant for their objectives and goals that was set out beforehand. The next thing that you want to look at is volume, intensity, and frequency. Volume meaning the amount of work done in a given set, frequency, the amount of work done in a given week, and then the intensity, how much weight are you actually lifting? This is going to be based on the directed stimuli. So if you're looking to increase maximal strength, then the intensity is going to be high and the volume will be lower. Flip side to that, you'll have hypertrophy where the volume is going to be slightly higher, the intensity will be lower, and the frequency needs to be in the same range as the volume so that you can get that stimulus of improving or building muscle mass. Progressions, that's going to go with periodization. So proper progressions, whether that be in a linear fashion or whether it be undulating, we want to make sure that you're constantly progressing. We want to do that in progressive overload fashion, which I'll go into that in a little bit more detail later on. Exercise selection, again, going back to the foundational patterns, looking at the proper joint prerequisites and the sport demand so that it can correlate over into the goals and objectives, right? Then the last two things we want to look at is rest periods and tempo. That's going to also dictate the intensity, right? And the adaptive response that you're trying to acquire. So with the rest intervals, if I have shorter rest intervals, it's going to be more metabolic in nature, more conditioning based. The tempo, if the tempo is longer, then I'm going to be damaging muscle a little bit more, so maybe it's a little bit more hypertrophy based. But that's also going to dictate, again, like I said, the adaptive responses. Now, periodization, right? So we have 4 major periodization models. I'm not going to go too deep into detail on this, but you have linear progressions, which is basically what we would call progressive overload. So you're going to go 5% increases each week over time, just slowly progressing in intensity so that you can get stronger, build more muscle, so on and so forth. Now, the linear progressions can be intensity based or it can be volume based, depending on what you want to accomplish from a goals perspective. Block periodization is focusing on a particular strength for a given amount of time and then switching it over. For the most part, block periodization is going to go from hypertrophy, strength, power, and speed if you're looking at it from an athletic standpoint and improving on sport performance. Conjugate is vertical integration, where we're going to be working on multiple modalities and methods of training per given week. So you're going to be still maintaining certain things and focusing on certain things in that given week. With nonlinear or undulating periodization, you can either do daily undulation or you can do weekly undulation. And the goal for this primarily is to mitigate fatigue and allow for progressions to occur while recovering throughout the week. So same thing with conjugate, we're gonna be focusing on one thing and then maintaining another each week throughout that process. So when you look at the progressions, your linear progressions, like I said, can increase in intensity week to week, or it can increase in volume week to week. It's a steady climb, and for the most part, this is beneficial for beginner trainees or beginner athletes. You'll see tremendous benefit and gains from this at a certain amount of time. Once the athlete or the trainee starts to get a little bit more experience, then you want to start looking into other forms of periodization and start to undulate or block out certain focus points. I do like step loading, and step loading can be done in increasing volumes and maintaining intensity. 3 to 4 week cycles is primarily what we would like to do. 3 weeks through in an increase of volume, and then you switch into a higher intensity and do the increase in volume in that higher intensity. So let's just say, for example, you're gonna do 3 to 4 weeks at an intensity of 65%. Each week, however, you're going to increase in volume. So maybe the first week you're gonna do 3 sets of 8. The second week you're gonna do 4 sets of 8, right? And then the third week you're gonna do 5 sets of 8. And then you'll increase the intensity and just go back to the same thing, right? So that's what we call step loading. Wave loading, however, is gonna be increasing intensities each week, 3 weeks up, 1 week down, and you're going to decrease the volume. So with a pendulum wave, we're gonna be going from, let's say 60, 65, 70%, decrease in the volume, take a slight deload on the 4th week, and then we go back and we're gonna go 65, 70, 75%, deload on the 4th week, so on and so forth. So you're still getting increases in volume and intensity with each of these progressions. All right, so now let's go over my basic programming checklist. Now, for the first 2 weeks, we're gonna be working on assessments and evaluations. So I'm looking at, from a physical standpoint, how strong they are, what type of mobility do they have, coordination, movement control, power production, so on and so forth. From a physiological perspective, we're also gonna look at VO2 max, we're gonna look at lactate threshold, we're gonna look at basic biomarkers where they'll be using lab testing. Shout out to Marek Health for that too as well. And then body composition, where they're at from a body composition standpoint. We use a in-body device to see exactly how much body fat they have on them, how much lean mass do they have on them, and then also their basal metabolic rate too as well. And then from a psychological standpoint, we're looking at personality traits, right? Their vision for the future, what they want to accomplish, and their overall goal set. And that's gonna help dictate the actual process going forward. The time frame is important, so that's gonna dictate the periodized model that I use, and it's gonna be based on the length. Most of my guys are gonna have about 8 to 12 weeks in camp for fight camps, so I usually prime them in the beginning, so making sure that they're ready to start camp. Usually we call it pre-camp. We get them ready and prepared for the rigors of camp, sparring, hard 2-a-day sessions, so on and so forth. And then from there, we're going to minimize the actual volume and intensity throughout each week, leading into a peak. From a philosophy standpoint, I'm gonna look at training importance. So I'm gonna look at the training methods that I utilize, whether it be dynamic effort, max effort, repetition effort, and then the focus points. That's going to allow me to periodize appropriately. Usually I'll be working through a conjugate system. That's what I've been using for the past 15 years. And it hasn't done me any wrong. Or I will do some type of block periodization if we have a longer time frame and I actually know when they're going to compete and when season starts. That's something that we would do with some of the off-season NFL guys that we work with, or anybody that has a set amount of time to prepare before the competition season begins. And lastly, you want to formulate the system. So we're going to put in proper progressions. We're going to make sure that we have auto-regulation put in place, and then also proper deloads and testing like we did here in the assessments throughout that time frame of the actual program so that we can see progress going forward. And it's also going to be predicated towards the volume, the intensity, and the frequency of training to allow for all that stimuli to occur so that we can get those adaptive responses so that they can get their goals accomplished, right? So once I have all this down and ready to go, then I'll start to put in the basic exercise selection, the sets and reps, the overall frequency of training, so on and so forth as time goes forward. And then from there, since I have the system, I'm able to auto-regulate based upon biofeedback from an objective and a subjective indicator standpoint. So if they're tired, fatigued, maybe they've done way too many training sessions that week from their skills training, from my athletes, then I will bring down the actual volume, bring down the intensity a little bit so that we can still progress, do something that's going to allow them to enhance in their quality of performance, but not overtrain them or dip into overtraining, right? If you want to find out more details on overtraining, I've done plenty of videos on that. All right, guys, so there you have it. That's how we program. That's how we progress each one of the athletes. Check out the checklist. And if you do want to go ahead and join us for one-on-one coaching, click the link down below for more details on how you can start getting trained by a Daru Strong coach. See you guys next time. Peace. Bye.